Just checking things here, making sure everything's working. Is everybody good to go? You guys can leave comments in the little comment box on the side to make sure that everybody can view this, and hopefully the streaming is working correctly. It looks good to me. Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. And I'm just going to keep an eye on the comments on the side. And as we go along, if you guys have questions, go ahead and post any that you have. Otherwise, I suppose I'll just start talking about the books and see. I'm reading the comments on the side in case you're wondering why I'm randomly laughing and cackling. Let's see. So, gosh, where to start? So these books, they would be categorized as new adult, upper young adult, which basically just means that the age group that I intended was high school age and up. So high school, college, I've had a few adults read it, and so hopefully everybody would be able to enjoy it in that age group category. The book is a mix of science fiction and fantasy. So I'd say it's a little bit more maybe on the science fiction side, but it's almost its own. It doesn't quite, to me anyway, from stuff that I've read, it doesn't feel like it fits in either, really. So if we talk about, I don't know, where do you guys want to start? Do you want me to start by talking about the characters? Do you want me to start with the plot a little bit? I kind of want to make sure that I'm covering whatever you guys would like to hear in particular. And the streaming video, by the way, it lags a little bit. So whatever you are hearing now is a little bit like behind when oh gosh, I can't even explain it right. But the time is off. So if it seems like I'm taking a little bit of time to like answer something you've asked, it's probably because for me the video hasn't come up yet on the screen, even though I've already answered it, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. A little bit behind. So for now, let's see. Maybe I'll start with characters. Would that be a reasonable place to start. So the three kind of main characters of the book. We have the main protagonist, Fanzam. You guys found out the name of the book is Fanzam. And then the two kind of other central characters are Fanzam's best friend. And here we go, we're going to start revealing names. This is going to get very, very exciting. So Fanzam's best friend, his name is Zeeth, which is, welcome Peach on the grid. I'm just reading people that are posting. Let's see. So Zeeth is Z-E-E-T-H. Zeeth is Fanzam's best friend. And then we have the main antagonist, who is Jax Vinstar. So these three characters are central to the entire story. Fanzam is, he's kind of an ass, and he is very egocentric. And throughout the entire book, you know, he has a lot of growth. He goes from being just very, very self-centered to sort of, I guess a lot of it's actually up to the reader, whether or not you think that he's making changes because he wants to be a different person or because he's doing it for the people that he's... Oh, I have questions. Let's see. How old are they? Okay, so Fanzam is 19, which, trying to think, the youngest characters in the book are about, I think the youngest is 15. So they're all kind of in the age bracket of 18 to in their early 20s is essentially the ages. Zeeth is 22, and then the main antagonist, he's quite a bit older. He is in his early 40s. Let's see. I guess if I go on to other characters, the majority of them are early 20s, majority. But there are a few that tend to be some people's who have read it. Some of their favorite characters tend to be a little bit younger than that. But I won't go into them yet. We'll go in. When do you think the book will be out? Reading more questions. So honestly, it really depends if it gets picked up. If I go for a smaller publisher or for a larger publisher. If it gets picked up by a smaller publisher, I could potentially have it out. Smaller publishers usually have their books out in 4 to 6 months, which is much, much sooner than it would be if I go for a larger publisher. Larger publishing houses can take up to 2 years to have a book out. But the biggest benefit to that is that larger publishers have the kind of marketing capabilities to really make your book available to a wider audience. So for me, it's just a case of figuring out whether or not, you know, do I want it out as soon as possible for everybody? Because I have a lot of people that do want to read it. And so do I make it available as soon as I can for people who are interested? Or do I just sort of wait and attempt to get into a larger publishing house? That's sort of the, that is the dilemma at the moment. So I'm thinking I'm going to go for, so to get into the larger publishing houses, you need to go the agent route, which that tends to be the part that is the most brutal, because agents don't typically take on many authors, yet they're getting hundreds of queries a week. So trying to convince someone who is getting these, you know, the slush pile basically of query letters reading comments again. Yeah, 2 years. Yep. So trying to convince them that out of these hundreds of people that they read a week, that you are the one, you know, that you have something that is interesting or you have something that's going to sell is very, very hard to convince them. It is a trial in and of itself, basically. So we'll see what happens. I'm giving it a try because I've had so much encouragement, even from my editor who lives in New York. She's just like, go for it, even if it doesn't work, just go for it. And if all else fails, she has some smaller publishers in mind that she adores and she thinks they'd be interested. Questions, let's see. So in what kind of universe / world is this? Like, is the world based on reality or fantasy? And if it is fantasy, how big is it? Okay, so essentially this story is, there are different dimensions, which you don't, in the very first book, you don't get to see a lot of the other dimensions. They just, you know that they exist and you hear about it. So essentially the idea is that the world they are in is very reminiscent to our world. You could think of it as a parallel dimension. But there are very obvious things as you're reading the book that are different. You'll hear something and you're like, oh, you know, we have that in our world. But then, you know, a few sentences later, you'll hear something and you're like, wait, what? They talk about, even in the very, very beginning of the book, you hear quite a bit about airships. And so, you know, as you're going along reading, oh, you know, they're in a coffee shop, somebody's ordering, you know, a dirty chai double whatever latte, you know, like, oh, we have those. And then, oh, but now there's airships downtown and blah, blah, blah. So to make a long story short, it is parallel universes. And as far as to how big is it, in the first book, let's just say there's a lot of growth over the entire series. In the first book, you are centered around one city in particular, and the city is called Larnis. L-A-R-N-I-S, Larnis. The city centers around Larnis and this sort of neighboring city called Marstove, M-A-R-S-T-O-V-E. And Marstove is more residential sort of city. It's very, many of the people who live there are wealthy. So I'm not going to go into the characters too much yet, but some of the characters live there. And then you have, it's just a very interesting landscape because it's very forested. You have a lot of, on the outskirts of like Larnis, you have a lot of forested landscapes going on. And then eventually it changes into a desert the farther out of the cities you go. And so on the outskirts you have one of Fanzam's main sort of bases that he has, and that area doesn't have a name in particular, but you get to hear a lot about where he and his followers mingle, where they stay, where they figure out what the hell they're doing, and and that's all on a desert sort of landscape. So getting back to how big it is, the first book, not that big because you don't see that much. You're staying in a very centralized sort of location. It's throughout the other 2 books, specifically the second book, which is not, I haven't written all of it yet, but I'm a decent way into it. And that they're actually going to other dimensions, so you're seeing all these other crazy places that they go to. So in that regard, it is a much bigger world. I hope that answered your question. So, and is it based on reality or fantasy? So, since it's parallel sort of dimensions, yes, it's based more on reality, I'd say, than fantasy. But as you go on into the other dimensions, there's a lot more fantasy elements in the other places that you get to see. And if you see these long breaks in between, it's either me waiting for more questions or me debating whether or not to start talking, you know, about other things. So I give it a couple seconds to see if anybody has other questions before I start talking about other stuff with the books. So some of these sort of fantastical elements of the, oop, there's more questions, just kidding. You're gonna kill off characters. Okay, are you gonna kill off characters like George R.R. Martin? And what inspired you to write the story? Okay, so am I going to kill off characters? Yes, there are characters that die, not to the degree that George R.R. Martin kills off his character. There is, you know, obviously I don't want to, I'm going to avoid any kind of spoilers, but there is sad stuff that happens even in the first book. Yeah, I don't want to give spoilers. I'm trying to be very careful what I say. So yes, there are characters that get killed off, but I'm not the kind of person that I don't like randomly just get rid of people. There is definitely a purpose for it, which you will understand when you read it. But I would say that it is nonetheless a bit depressing. So, what inspired you to write this story? So, gosh, when I was younger, I used to come up with all these really crazy games for my cousins and I. We would all play, and I'd come up with these really intricate worlds for like a kid. It was kind of like looking back on it now, and I've seen some of the stuff that I wrote. I'm like, what the heck? You were like a little kid. Where did you come up with this stuff? And even very like complicated concepts in general. And so as I got older, initially, I'm trying to remember, Fanzam first kind of came to me. I actually had a dream, and I interacted with him in a dream. And it sort of made me realize, like, maybe, because I envisioned it, the entire story, as a film initially, but I had no idea how to write a screenplay. And so I was like, I'll just write it as a book. And it just flowed really, really well. So as far as what inspired it, I think it's all the different kind of games I played when I was younger, the stuff I came up with, and then having I have very, very vivid dreams where sometimes I interact with the characters, or it's weird. It's craziness. And so that kind of pushed me to want to write it. And as far as where maybe do I get my inspiration from, forests, which is very odd, but any kind of like a forest setting, I'll see it, especially coastal forests. There's just something intriguing to me about them, and I can look at a forest and I can like see my characters in my imagination. I can see my characters like interacting or what they would be doing, and that oftentimes gives me a lot of inspiration to continue writing whatever it is that I'm working on. So something that is kind of interesting, going back to something I was going to mention before with kind of the fantastical elements of this story, is the fact that people have abilities. So, gosh, I'm trying to think where to start with this to give you the background. So, since you have these different dimensions, okay, there is a space in between the dimensions that sort of holds everything together. They think of it like the glue that holds all the dimensions together, and they call this space the void. And some things happen and something escapes from this space, from the void, and it is a substance that has very unique properties and can essentially give people different sorts of abilities. For example, you have, the typical things like telekinesis, telekinetic sorts of things, psychic, that's the word I was looking for, psychic sort of abilities, like teleportation or mind reading. You have little things like that, or you have some characters that, one in particular who I've mentioned to a few of you, he is, he's kind of crazy. Not kind of, he is very crazy. His name is Vein, V-E-I-N, and his mind has been disintegrated, essentially, from experimentation, and he can't die from his injuries, so his wounds never heal. So he's like this grotesque-looking, crazy person, because he's always bleeding, basically. Nothing heals, so he just sort of, he's psychotic, and he's like the only character in the entire book, really, who nobody knows quite how to deal with him, so they don't know how to get rid of him, and so you have things like that, where it's not, that's not necessarily an ability, I wouldn't say, except like being invincible, sort of, isn't really an ability, but you have all these kind of odd, trying to think of other examples. One where one character, if he gets injured, the injury, he sustains the injury, but it's also passed on to whomever, which I'm not going to give the details of his abilities because it's something that he explains throughout the story, but basically he can harm other people with whatever injury he gets. Who else do we have? Abilities. Fanzam in particular, so his has to do with psychic stuff. So he does teleportation and he can do mind reading, but there's all kinds of like, what's the word for it? He doesn't just have these abilities. There's restrictions to what he can do, and a lot of the stuff is explained, like how it works. So the reason behind me using, like, for psychic abilities, for example, is that in our own world, we talk, there's all kinds of books and all kinds of shows and stuff where we play with the idea of psychic people, of teleporting or whatever. And the idea was, for the purposes of these books, was kind of like, well, maybe there's more to that. Like maybe, I'm trying to think how to explain this in a way that makes sense. That since we in our own world have our kind of lore, I guess. I don't know if lore is the right word, but we have our own sort of lore about psychic abilities and stuff. And so that's kind of the same in this other world, where they would have had sort of their own lore about psychic abilities, or thought, there's no such thing as teleportation, there's no such thing as mind reading, and then all of a sudden, whoa, what the heck is this substance that allows this? So maybe the lore must have come from somewhere. Maybe it came from whatever this substance is. You have more normal just abilities, more normal talents, I guess. People who are very good at hacking into, technological sorts of abilities, talents. More on the side of powers, you have people who, one character in particular, how to explain it? His bones basically can shield his body when he's injured, so it comes out of his skin sort of like a shield. But that also has a lot of limits. It's extremely dangerous because it doesn't heal very quickly. So even though it protects him at the time, it puts him at risk of getting killed. yeah, I think that's just a good start with crazy abilities and fantastical elements. If we go back to the characters and everything, so one of basically the interesting thing, I guess, with this story is that it's not about the very first book. It's very fast-paced with the plot, but I'd say what really propels it and what's most intriguing is the character dynamics. It's the relationships in the story that you find out. There's so many connections, because I have a lot of characters. I have so many characters, and people have all these really crazy connections to each other that when I initially started writing it, like looking back on it now, when I look at it, I'm like, there's so many people, how did this all work? how was all the connections, how did that work out the way that I wanted? But it did. And so I'd say that's kind of the most interesting piece for me, especially just to write it. So the main characters, you have, again, Fanzam, his best friend Zeus, and you have Jax Vinstar. So Jax Vinstar and Fanzam have a very interesting kind of history. I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but just to give you an idea of where the character dynamics are coming from, Jax Vinstar is a geneticist. He loves to mess with oh my gosh, I'm trying to decide how to say it without like giving away stuff. He kind of facilitates some of the abilities, because he takes test subjects and he does his little science-y stuff on them. And essentially, Fanzam used to work with him, used to work for him, and they had a very kind of interesting relationship. They were just very, almost like brothers, I guess. Just, even though Fanzam is so much younger than him, he was always kind of like the hitman. He'd go out and take care of whatever, and that was just their interaction. And eventually Fanzam finds out something that he isn't very fond of, and he leaves. And so you have this obviously old connection where throughout the entire book, people are always questioning, well, are they really trying to kill each other? Because it just seems like they sort of, you can tell that Fanzam is angry, and he has all of this kind of pent-up rage that he's had for all these things that happen that you find out throughout the book. And so, it's pretty obvious that he seems like he wants to get rid of Jax. He's done. He's like, screw it, I don't want to deal with this anymore. But Jax just sort of toys with him. He's not, like, he confronts him and he fights him, but you just sort of get this feeling that he's like, I'm trying to think of an example of a character that Jax is a very quirky character. To give you guys an example, like, he carries around a box of uncooked noodles. And there's actually a reason for it, which is the crazier thing that you find out later. But he carries around this box of uncooked noodles, and he wears mostly green. Green is a very important color throughout the book. It's all explained in the book, which I may touch on it a little bit here if we have the time and if people are interested. But so he wears all these green garments. He has this crazy little top hat that he wears, this green top hat. He carries around these uncooked noodles. So he, trying to think of the right word to describe him, he would not look like a threat. He's just sort of this odd character, essentially. But you know that there's something going on. He does his experiments. He is the CEO of this huge company that's going on in Larnus, Vinstar Enterprises, or Vinstar Incorporated, not Enterprises. And I've mentioned before to some of you that there is this green eye is kind of the symbol of their company. And the eye is basically tattooed on anybody that he either experiments on or anybody that works for him has this tattoo. So even Fanzam, there's all these questions from people who follow Fanzam. So do you have the tattoo? Where do you have the tattoo? And just this. I'm not going to give too much away on that. But their dynamic is a lot of fun to write, and how they kind of argue, or they just, yeah, it's a lot of fun to write for them. Zeeth that would be kind of the oddball out in this entire story. He, most of the characters love to fight. They're engaged in this. They are Fanzam is very bloodthirsty. He's very, he has these abilities, so you'd almost see him as being, like, in other circumstances, he would almost seem like a superhero sort of character, but he's so not. He is very, very, like I said, bloodthirsty, kind of aggressive, and yet he easily gets, because of his age, he easily gets fed up. Jack Spinstar, he's kind of more reserved. You don't know really what he's feeling. He's kind of, I don't know how to, there's a word I'm trying to think of, and I can't think of the right word for him. But you can tell, basically, that most of the characters want to be there to fight. Whereas you have Zeeth, who is the best friend, Fanzam's best friend, who initially at the start of the story is the biggest chicken shit ever. Like, he's extremely compassionate. He is a very caring character. And he is there to support Fanzam. That is what he's there for. That's the only reason he involves himself in any of the fighting. But he doesn't like to kill, he doesn't like the blood, none of it. So, and he has his own issues, own phobias and things, stuff that he's trying to work through, and that obviously also makes his dynamic really fun to write when he is involved with Fanzam or Jax. Because he's also, being a little bit older than Fanzam, he's also sort of the one trying to be like, okay, let's just stop for a moment and let's, like, think about what we're about to do here, Fanzam. Can you not go and come over here, leave those people, don't kill those people yet, just come and talk to me, sort of thing. And I mean, if you're interested, I can talk about the other kind of characters that are involved in this story, if you guys are interested. Those are the three just sort of core characters, but there are a lot of, I don't know that I even call them secondary characters, really, because they are very key to the story. They're just not the pivotal characters. And I've also talked so much, I want to give you guys a chance to ask questions, unless you're, like, okay with me just sort of randomly talking. But I'll wait a second and see. Again, because of the lag of the video, I'll just wait a few minutes and see if, not minutes, a few seconds, and see if anybody is interested in asking questions. Do you have any questions? And I'm watching myself. I'm watching this replay. You can see it's a very strange. Oh, comments. Okay, and people say games cause violence. Games cause creativity. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Are there going to be major time skips? Like, is the second book going to start off a few years after the events of the first book? No. So, well, I don't want to say don't want to say that. I'm not going to be like definitive. No, there's going to be no time skips. Basically, so let me set up the way that the first book starts. is almost a time skip, because I don't think this is a spoiler, because you find out in the very, very opening of the book. So I'm going to just say it. This is not a spoiler. It's not a spoiler. Okay, so in the very first book, what you find out is that you are with Zeeth at the start of the book, and Fanzam and Jax Vinstar have been gone, essentially. They have been gone for 2 years. They're both completely out of the picture. And the part that's so complicated is that Zeeth was present when they disappeared. He was involved, he was there, and so there's a level of guilt that he would have about being present and all the stuff that happens. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but at the start of the book, you already kind of have a time jump, because you're starting. Let me see how to explain this intellectually. So you are starting. It's not so much starting in the future. It's the present, and the way that the book is set up is that Zeeth receives, which I guess I didn't explain this already, but he receives the substance that I had mentioned that comes from the space between the dimensions, the space that's called the void, and there's a substance that comes from that space. And in the book, most people just call it obsidian, because it would look like what we think of as obsidian, the rock obsidian. That's what it looks like. It looks like an obsidian stone, yet it's obviously not what we think of as the rock, because it has all these bizarre qualities. And most of the time, it isn't actually in a solid form. It can liquefy, and this isn't, we're still, I'm trying to decide, how much to tell you or how much not to, but it sort of has its own thing that it's doing. It's its own little entity. And so at the very start of the book, Zeeth receives this substance, which it went missing at about the same time that Jax and Fanzam sort of poofed. So Zeeth has not seen this substance in 2 years. So he's freaking out. He receives this, and the entire setup of the first book is that this substance, because of the properties and the things that it can do, the way that the first book is set up is that he is seeing other people's thoughts and memories and things of the few months leading up to Fanzam and Jax disappearing. So he's going back, and he even experiences some of his own memories. He's watching them and kind of like, okay, this is bizarre. I lived through this. Why am I watching my own memories, my own thoughts? And that's just the way that the first book is set up. And so at the end of it, we're not going to go there. I'm not going to talk about that. But the way that the other books are set up is that there is not a time jump at that point. Where you end in the first book is where it picks up in the second book. And for the third one, I have all the, I know where I'm going with it, but obviously since I haven't actually written it yet, I don't want to say what will or will not happen as far as time jumps and things, but I'm not thinking there's going to be any kind of time jump even with the last book. Yeah. I hope that answered. I hope that answered your question. Yeah. So. Yeah. There's no years time jumps aside from the first book and kind of how you're starting off and looking back. But it's not set up where you're not seeing like flashbacks going back and forth between a flashback and then the present and then a flashback. I hate that. Personally, that drives me insane. So it's not set up like that. It's more like you have the moment at the beginning where you're just with Zeeth, and then whoosh, he's just sort of shoved through these memories and thoughts and all the stuff leading up to what happens at the end of the first book. Yeah. If we have more questions, again, I'll wait a second to see. And if there aren't questions, then I will talk about whatever, maybe more characters. It's so funny to watch the playback. I don't know if any of you guys have done live stream, but are they all part of the Illuminati? No. The green eye. Oh god. Okay, I didn't even see. I didn't even see the question, the post before it. I'm reading the comments again. So from whose perspective is the story told? So the way that it's not really told from any particular character's perspectives. You get, in that sense, you had mentioned earlier, George R. R. Martin. And so you're getting a little bit of different people's perspectives, but it's not jarring. In the first book, it's sort of Zeeth's perspective because he's the one sort of seeing these like memories and stuff, yet not. That was like a very complicated question, but not because you're experiencing. He's watching these memories and stuff, but they're memories of other people. It's other people's thoughts, and so you're getting other characters' perspectives on the events that are going on, and sometimes they overlap. So you may see somebody, and how they're experiencing something, and then you go to another character and they may have interacted, or so it's just a very interesting dynamic. And then at the start of each chapter, you're briefly getting Zeeth, like as he's watching these memories, thinking something like, why am I seeing, like, what is the point of watching these memories? Or him kind of trying to pick out, well, was that important? Like, am I being shown these memories because I need to pick out something from them? Is there something I'm not understanding, something I'm missing? So you get little brief glimmers of him. And since you mentioned the green eye, so that is actually very symbolic in the story. There's meaning behind it, and it actually has to do with the obsidian, the substance that's from the space between the dimensions. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but it has to do with that, the symbolism behind it. And so I guess something else to mention is that Jax Vinstar, he's essentially helping the substance. He's helping the obsidian. And so he takes on that symbol as his company logo, and he sort of is the front for a lot of stuff that goes on. And if we get into character dynamics again, he actually has an older brother. Jax Vinstar has an older brother who his name is Mick, M-I-C, Mick Vinstar. And he is equally he's into all this stuff as well. He's not the face of the company, but he is a huge part of the story as well. He's in there. The difference is that Fanzam doesn't despise Mick the way that he despises Jax. Mick, he just sort of views him as just a nuisance. He just finds him annoying, and he finds him. He quite a few times mentions him as being a coward. He just thinks he's a coward because he's not immediately involved in the conflicts that are going on. He sort of takes on like this back, under the radar sort of role. Yet he's causing so many things that are going on, and just another interesting sort of dynamic that you see a lot in the book. Trying to think, I have so many characters. I'm just trying to think of which ones might be of interest to you guys, or where I should. Again, I'll wait a second and see if you guys have more questions before I go on to more characters. I'm very animated when I talk. The little video that shows the playback, and I'm watching my... This is very entertaining. Just waiting for the video to catch up. I'm waiting for questions. And if not, then I will carry on with more of the characters or plot, whichever you guys are interested in. So if we go for some of the other characters within, so Fanzam kind of has his group, his little group of followers that most of them are either made up of renegades from the local militia. So there is a military, a very strong military presence within Larnis. But most of them, there's all this stuff that goes on, obviously, behind the scenes where, well, it's not even so much that it's hidden or anything. People know that it's going on. People know that Jax sort of has his thumb, you know, on the military presence. He sort of controls a lot of what's going on. And so many of the people in the military leave. So Fanzam has these renegades that don't believe in what's going on with Jax kind of in control of stuff. You have failed experiments, people who were dubbed failed experiments of Jax's, who rightly so or not rightly so are very irritated, and so they, you know, leave Jax and go with Fanzam. But the interesting thing is that a lot of people also just, it's kind of that saying of the lesser of two evils, sort of, because it's easy enough to say that neither of them are really like good people between Fanzam and Jax. They both are a bit questionable, and so some of the people that actually join Fanzam, they fear him just as much as they fear Jax. Yet, you know, you're still sort of forced if you're in this particular location, and Fanzam makes comments sometimes that the people that he wants around, you know, he says, I don't want people around that are just afraid of me. They need to have a purpose for being here. If they're going to be here, I want them to despise Jax more than they hate me, so that they'll actually go out and do what I need them to do. And so there's again, try to choose carefully what I explain. So there's just a lot of interesting dynamics with the people that he even interacts with every day. Within his kind of core little group, so you have him, Zeeth. So here we go into more character names. I'll start with Slyke and Braun, I guess is where I'll start. Slyke and Braun, because most of the characters, they tend to like kind of go into pairs and sort of, if they're going to go do things and set up whatever, they tend to either work in 4s or 2s. And that's kind of how they establish their own little friendships within units. And so Slyke is, he just turned 21 in the book, so he's kind of how his name sounds. He's kind of, it's like almost sleazy. I don't know if that's the right word. He's kind of a ladies' man, and he does not like Fanzam. He's there for Braun. Braun is his friend. He cares about Braun. He doesn't give two shits about Fanzam. He's just sort of there. He would be the thorn in Fanzam's side. So their dynamic is a lot of fun to write because they really hate each other. And Slyke is very can be comedic. You know, he is a very just sort of witty kind of character. His hair, he lost a bet on his birthday, so his hair is like dyed green. He's got spiked green hair. And and he has an ability, which I won't go into that at the moment. But then you have Braun. Braun was one of the renegades from the local militia. So he's not a failed experiment. He's just a military guy who he's a very, very kind character. He's one of those characters that you would maybe look at him and see him more as a teddy bear. Like, he's threatening looking, and a lot of people mention it in the book, that he has this air of being very powerful and very authoritative. And he is quite a bit older than the other characters. He's one of the few within that group that he's in his 30s, early 30s, or late, yeah. Gosh, I have so many characters, it's just like clutter-brained here, but so he's one of the older characters, and you find out a lot about his life and things that he has to deal with, being like an older fellow among all these kind of younger. So he looks at Slyke as somebody who he looks out for. This is like the whole group where he makes comments that, these are kids to him in his eyes, all these people that he's interacting with, aside from like Jax, he views as being younger. And so he's like, here I am, this military guy, and it's my duty to protect these people who really maybe are not prepared, they're not fighters necessarily. Slyke was he was a failed experiment of Jax's. It doesn't necessarily make him a fighter. So there's just these interesting dynamics with the characters that you get to see a lot of in the first book. And then within that group again, so you have Fanzam, you have his best friend Zeeth, you have Slyke and Braun, and then you have Rin and Frey. So Rin is sort of my tribute. She's sort of my tribute to all the anime that has influenced me, which I'm sure you guys can all attest to that. So she is partly in my, I try not to do a lot of nationalities and stuff in the book. I have descriptions of what they look like, but I don't necessarily say, like, this person is from this country. I think you get that once. But Rin, I would see her as being at least partly Asian. She's relatively short. She always wears like a black jumper, and she has really, really, really long hair, like hair freaking for days. And she puts it up in these little buns that she wears, and she's a character with abilities, so she's kind of a badass. But she looks like, I'm trying to think of how Zeeth describes her. He just God, what is she? He says something like, she looks like this petite sort of rainbow, candy and rainbows sort of person who she's very bright, very friendly, and yet when you get to know her and you kind of know like what she's capable of, it's like, I'm not gonna be, I'm not gonna push your buttons sort of thing. Frey is a very quiet character, but it makes him he's the one who has the bone, that the ability that his bone can come out and kind of be like a shield. And he's a very reserved character. He is very conscious of Rin. So again, when they are kind of doing their paired up, doing whatever they need to be doing for the day, he's just very, very aware of her and sort of feels like he needs to be looking out for her. And again, they're all like in their early 20s. Yeah, so that's the core group. I think I'm missing someone. Man, who am I missing? Oh, Fez. Okay. So Fez, again, he's kind of linked to Braun. Fez and Braun were both military guys, both renegades from the military. Fez is older even than Braun. he's older than pretty much most of the characters that he interacts with. And Fez is basically one of the captains that interacts with Fanzam. So he looks after the 4 characters I mentioned. He looks after Slyke and Braun and Rin and Frey. That's sort of that's who he focuses on the most, because that's who he interacts with the most. And his character, you don't see as much of him in the first book. I mean, he is, but you don't really get to delve into his character as much as the others. But you really get to see a lot of who he is, and I think he's going to be one of those characters that he's going to go under the radar until people really get to learn more about him, and especially he has a bigger role in the second book. And so I think he's one of those characters that will really kind of come into his part more as you get to know him. So I don't want to give too much away about him, but he's kind of the fretful older character. You know, he's in charge of all these young people. Kind of the view that Braun has, where Braun is always worried about looking after Slyke. Fez is like, I have all these young people, and they're all like going off to go do whatever, the fights and the raids and all the stuff that's going on, and it's like, this is what I have to take care of. I have to look after them and make sure things run smoothly, make sure that Fanzam doesn't get too angry, make sure that, you know, Slyke doesn't piss him off. And so, yeah, that's the core group. Oh, wait again. I'll see if you guys have more questions. And then maybe I'll go into a little bit with Jax and who kind of works with him. And unless you guys want me to go into plot. Or if you have any questions in general. Because my plan for this live stream was to go for about 2 hours this time. So we're at 3 p.m. my time, so it's been an hour, just kind of crazy. So depending on how the next hour goes, I don't mind going a little bit over if people have questions and if you're interested, but we'll see how it goes. Any questions? Maybe what I will do is go into a little bit with plot if there aren't any questions. Very, very broadly, though. Obviously, I don't want to give away anything, which would not be that hard to do. I get so like into whatever I'm talking about that I have to be careful what I say. Any questions? No? No questions? So just really basic plot stuff. Essentially, Fanzam has this debt to repay, basically. He is interacting a lot with Jax, obviously, and there's this debt that he has to the substance that comes from the space between the dimensions, from this void. There's this weird connection that's going on, and this debt that he needs to repay. So the issue with the first book is Fanzam trying to figure out how he is going to avoid this debt. You know, he's not the kind of character that he's not going to just go into hiding. That's not his personality at all. He'd much rather just kill everything that's that's a threat and that's annoying him. So he, the setup with the first book is just him trying to gain the upper hand, essentially, trying to figure out, like, okay, Jax knows me. He knows what I'm capable of. He knows my personality. So how do I get one step ahead of him? And now that he's helping the weird substance, what does he need to do to eliminate Jax and avoid, or again, I'm trying not to give too much detail on it, but how to, I guess avoid is just a good word. He wants to pass there's a deadline, basically. There's a deadline going on with this debt that needs to be repaid, and so he's trying to figure out if he can outlast the deadline. And for him, just kind of, he's also just a very snarky sort of character, so he's like, if I can make it past the deadline, then screw, screw all of these people that are trying to control me. He thinks that at that time, he thinks that's the answer, is just to make it past his set date, which is something that you find out as the story goes on. He's very reluctant to explain what the debt is or what the outcome will be, which is something that even Zeeth, his best friend Zeeth, talks about a lot throughout the book, is that he's trying to figure out what is this debt that he owes, and why won't he tell me? If he can't tell his best friend what is going on, Zeeth kind of knows that he's not all powerful. He has these abilities, but it's not like he's invincible. So yeah, without going into too much detail, that's a very, very broad, basic premise. That's sort of what's going on. And to anybody on the outside of this stuff that's going on, this conflict, it would literally just look like, Fanzam and Jax are just pissed at each other. And on the outside, it just sort of looks like this petty fight that's going on, when there's actually so much more, which I can't tell you all the little things that are going on, but there's so much more happening that you find out as the story goes on. Even things with Jax and his brother Mick, sort of stuff that you find out. It's very interesting. It's little plot things. Do you guys have questions? Questions thus far? Before I talk and give away things. Before I give away all the important tidbits of information. And I see on the screen, again, every single time I pause, I'm watching, and I saw myself doing this. Oh my gosh, so many questions. This is exciting. Hi, everybody. I don't know if there's a lag with the comments or if you all suddenly magically appeared. This is very exciting. What's up? Hello. So are we going to get a visual representation of the characters, like on the cover of the book? I kind of want to know what they look like. Okay, so if I could develop my own cover, which chances are you can give a little bit of input with publishers. If I was self-publishing, you can do whatever you want. It's totally your call. But with publishers, they're going to do whatever they think is going to sell best. But ideally, if I could set up the appearance of the book, I would see it as a solid black background, but symbols that are very symbolic to the story. Like maybe on the back of the book could be the logo that I mentioned, the eye. It's Vinstar's company logo, yet it has so much more meaning to the book than simply being like his symbol that he tattoos on everybody. And then oh my gosh, I didn't even talk about this. And then the other thing that's so important, how could I don't know how I did not mention this. This is very important, but Fanzam, which for those of you who have just showed up, in case you don't know all the characters' names, the main character Fanzam, he I don't want to say blind. He's not blind because he has his own the substance that gives him these abilities, that has infected him essentially, gives him its version of sight. So he doesn't have his own. He's seeing things as it would see the world. But it changes the way his eyes look. So his eyes are basically pale white. It's almost like there's no iris. People describe it as being almost like this eerie moonlit kind of. People either describe it as his eyes as looking pale or looking in certain lightings almost like they're moonlit hue sort of thing going on. And so if I could do something on the cover of the book, what I think would be really, if there was lots of money to do this, it'd be cool to have some kind of, is it hologram? Is it not hologram? What's the word I'm looking? Holo something. This is terrible. I can't think of the word. Where when you move the book, you know, it changes the way the image looks. So when he loses, sometimes he loses control of whatever he's doing, and the substance has a moment to kind of do its own thing, and so whenever he crosses that boundary or he's low on his own kind of energy and he needs to rely on the substance more, his eyes go from being pale to this murky appearance, which looks a lot like the substance, which looks like these. So people who are new, the substance looks a lot like what we would consider obsidian. It looks like the obsidian stone, but in a liquefied sort of form. So essentially, his eyes change. You know he's normal and he's good to go, his cranky self, when his eyes are pale. But when his eyes get kind of murky in color and you have this weird thing going on in his eyes that, you know, you're in deep shit. So what would be awesome on the cover is to have the eye. I think that would be just, that would make my day, my year, my life. That would make my life, to have the eye be able to change or something, and then maybe have the company logo, the green eye logo. That's kind of my idea of cover sorts of things. I'm the kind of person, I like it to be very simple, hence having like a black background sort of thing and have just one item or one symbol be the centerpiece of the book. But you mentioned you wanted to know what they look like. So, I mean, I can give like general descriptions of what characters look like. I'm not so sure that, you know, I don't know if anybody's going to be sketching them within the actual book or anything. You know, it's so interesting because even doing this book trailer, it's fascinating to see how people, you know, envision when you give like descriptions, and just to see how people interpret the characters. When you know, in my head, I pretty much see them as real people. I kind of have an idea in my head of what they would look like as a real person, because as I mentioned, when we started the live stream, I originally envisioned this as a film, so I do see them as people. Fanzam, oh gosh, Fanzam, his wardrobe, he doesn't care whatsoever what he looks like. So his entire wardrobe is just black shirts and jeans. That is all he wears, which is also understandable because if he can't see what he actually, like, again, going back to him sort of being blind, but not really, that he sees the world differently, that he wouldn't really see those clothing items. He doesn't really know what it looks like. So he doesn't care what he looks like or what anybody else looks like, for that matter. As far as descriptions, things that his hair is just kind of brown, shaggy. He's very normal sort of build. He's not some big muscle macho person. Zeeth, his best friend, Zeeth, is very tall, very lanky. He's quite the character. He has a neon jacket that he wears everywhere. It's a gift from his siblings and his granddad. So the neon jacket is a little bit small for him, so it like rides up his arms. So he sort of looks like he just doesn't fit in some of the stuff that he wears, but he keeps it because it's important to him. He has kind of shaggy, dirty blonde hair. In my head, I see it a little bit more brown than blonde, really, but it's totally, you know, people, you make what you will of descriptions like dirty blonde. It's however you envision it, whatever appeals to you most as a reader. He has hazel eyes, and he has a scar that goes across his face. That's like from one lip to the side, which you hear later, like how he got it and everything. But that is my personal tribute, actually, to the Joker. The Joker has, Heath Ledger's portrayal even of the Joker has really influenced like what I view as a more intriguing sort of villain. And so that's my personal tribute to that character. Jack Finstar, we kind of briefly talked about him. He, from the women, so there are a few women in the story, which there's one I just realized I didn't talk about, and she's like a central character, and she's just awesome, and I'll get into her in a second, but Jack Finstar, to most of the women in the story, they all sort of see him as being this kind of ruggedly attractive sort of person, but his personality is just so daunting and just very, again, I can't give away too much, but he's just, appearance-wise, he would be more built. He's kind of, but nobody's really macho sort of characters or anything. He, kind of rugged appearance, and he's, clothing again, he wears all green. Again, green is very symbolic, so he, wears his green shirts and his green top hat, and he carries around his uncooked noodles, so his hair is sort of described in the book as being sort of bushy, so, you know, I don't know what kind of image that gives. If you're thinking like a mad scientist or something, that's not exactly, it's not scary bushy, it's just bushy enough that when he wears his top hat, it like tilts on his head and stuff. People comment as they watch him, he just looks so peculiar, he looks sort of thrown together, because, you know, things are falling, and he's always talking about his noodles, wanting to find a microwave, so he's just a very odd character. Not sure if you already said it, but how long did it take you to write your book? I have not said that yet. Good question. So I started writing, oh gosh, I started writing back in high school. So I think my sophomore year of high school. It's been so long now. I've been thinking of the characters far longer than that. As I mentioned earlier in the live stream that I used to have dreams about the characters, and I developed a lot of these weird worlds when I was younger that I would play with my cousins and stuff. And so a lot of it is left over from when I was younger. I had these characters in my mind and these things that the way they interacted, and all this stuff that went on, and so they've been with me for a very long time. But I didn't actually start writing anything where I got to the point where I was like, okay, I need to write this down. And so I started writing them in high school. And I just never told anybody. I was pretty quiet about it because, I don't know, who knows why you do anything in high school, but I didn't finally start talking about it really till college. So it's been, what, like, probably, I want to say like, probably 7 years. And again, granted, that's working on and off. That's not like, that's not my entire focus constantly that I was working on these books. I think about them all the time. I can't even, it's to the point where I like can't even walk around places really without thinking about them. So it looks like we are, I don't know what's happening here. It says that it's thinking. I'm not sure why it's thinking. Hopefully it hasn't frozen. Anyway, yeah, so it's been a few years, actually, that I've been working on the books. Let's see. Oh, and do some of the characters have scars or injuries from the past? Yes. So the one in particular that always comes to mind, obviously, is Zeeth, just because it's like an obvious sort of thing that he has on his face. But a lot of the characters, even if it's not something that they talk about a lot or it's not something that you see a lot, I'll save some of it. There's some interesting stuff that goes on in the book as far as your question is concerned. So we'll save that at the moment. I hope this is still recording. It says it's thinking. I'm not sure what that means, but hopefully we're okay. Are you going to draw the characters? They look interesting. So what's going on with the book trailer thing? I cannot draw. I cannot draw to save my life. So anything that is drawing related, hopefully we have people in the group that are artists and everything. So we'll see what everybody comes up with. That's going to be the form of drawing because I can't draw. So it's going to be other people's interpretations of the characters and everything. I mean, the best that I could really do would be find images online of like real people who I think are visually similar to the characters. But sorry, I'm just reading this many comments. But yeah, so I can't draw at all. So that will not be happening, though I really wish I could. Because it'd be nice if I could like share what I actually have in my head. That would be very helpful. Hi Kai. I see people are posting hello. And Tori, hello. Does any character have something special in their physique, like a scar on their faces or something like that? Yeah, so that's kind of what we were talking about. Zeeth would just be the one that always comes to mind, and specifically on his face. Because part of the reason for that is because some of the characters actually have healing abilities, and so anytime they would have an injury, which there's all kinds of horrible things that they all do to each other, but the injuries would all heal. So, except for Vane, of course, which for people, I was trying to debate how to explain this, and some people haven't been here, but Vane is one of the characters that his injuries never heal, but he never dies, so he's just always bleeding, so he has just these injuries everywhere. He looks like, oh. You can't even say he has scars, because he doesn't have any scars. They're just, nothing is healed. He looks like, as one of the characters says it in the book, he looks like he has had one too many play dates with a blender. He looks a bit physically frightening. Yeah. Fanzam, that's another thing I didn't mention with Fanzam's abilities. One of them is healing. And so he can, you know, he gets ripped to bits, there are a lot of things that happen to him, and he pretty much can heal his injuries, whatever they are. Again, there are restrictions. With everything else I've talked about, there's limitations to what he can do, or like how much healing he can do, or what he has to do to be able to heal again later. There's all kinds of limits with his capabilities, but he's not the only character with healing abilities. Who's your favorite character, and who would you date? Oh gosh. Who is my favorite? I think, oh, that's a really hard question. Yeah, for those of you that didn't hear the live stream earlier, I have a lot of characters, which I'm not even touching on most of. Like, I'm not even mentioning most of them. I have so many. But if I'm being completely honest, I almost think my favorite is the main character. And like, that's why he's the main character, is that I feel like Fanzam is just so intriguing to me. I don't think I wouldn't date him. I don't. He's a little violent and psychotic, and when he gets pissed off, he has a very bad temper. So I wouldn't say he's dating material. But he's definitely my favorite. There's just something he still has redeeming qualities, and he's still just a very interesting character, and his dynamics with other characters is so much fun to write. And so, yeah, I'd have to say he's my favorite. I also love writing for Vane, just because Vane is truly insane. Like, if we had to say somebody who's completely lost his marbles, Vane has lost his marbles. He often has the mental capacity of a child, and so he's fun for me to write, because I can just he's very unpredictable. He works with Jax. He does whatever Jax tells him to do, yet he still has this air of being uncontrollable, because he's the only character that nobody knows how to get rid of him. Since his injuries don't heal and he doesn't die. So he's just sort of this formidable force that's always there. Yet he acts like he has his moments where he talks like a child, or he has temper tantrums like a little kid. So he's just very interesting to write for. Just to let you guys know, the comments load slowish for her, so it might take her a bit to reply. Yes, they do load very slowly for me, so I apologize if I'm getting to your questions late. Why are you doing this? I'm doing this because these are my books, basically, that will be available within some time period, hopefully in the near future. I have an editor in New York, and right now I'm just trying to figure out whether to get a smaller publisher or a larger publisher. So that's where we're at the moment, is just trying to get them available for everyone. And so this is just a Q&A to share some information about them before they're available. Are there any couples or other types of interesting relationships in the book? So, yes. Yes, there are. Which it doesn't necessarily start out that way. People are generally not together, just because of, you have to think of the situation they're in, where you have all this fighting going on, people are getting injured all the time, and so many of the characters, even though they're fairly young, they still kind of have the wherewithal to realize that maybe having significant others is not the best idea in this situation. Yet, for some of them, it happens anyway. The most interesting dynamic, I'd say, is with one of the main females that I briefly mentioned, and I didn't actually go into any detail on her. Her name is Zia, Z-E-A, and she is sort of this wild card in the entire book. She plays both sides. She's been friends for years with Jax, Vinstar, the main antagonist. Yet she interacts with Fanzam and she helps him, and so she definitely is like, she's just sort of this hit woman. They hire her, she does her thing, yet she's definitely, they both care about her, so she's kind of in this position where she, in her own way, can kind of control some of the stuff that happens, because she's in this position where neither of them really, like, they both know that she's doing all this stuff. They both know that she's interacting with and making a mess of things on her own, and they don't do anything about it. Jax often actually wants her protected and wants her left out of the fighting that's going on. And then Fanzam, his excuse, he's like, oh, I'll get rid of her one day. I'll get rid of her one day, sort of thing. So there's a very interesting interaction with Zia. And then as far as like kind of a romantic thing, she interacts quite a bit in the first book with Z. So I think you're going to have people that, if we think about like the different kind of little fandoms and things that go on, I could see people like wanting her with Zeeth, or wanting her with Jax, or wanting her with Fanzam, that she's just she's kind of this badass character that kind of does whatever she wants, and with good reason. Again, I can't give you a lot of detail, but she's not some little like pushover pawn piece in it. She is kind of one of the major characters, and in the book she's 25. Yeah. So yeah, I think she'll be the most interesting for people just to sort of pair with, just for people to play with the idea of who she's with. And yes, for the most part in the first book, she does kind of side with one person in particular, but I won't give that away. So when he loses control, he becomes a monster and he starts destroying everything. Okay, so this question is related to Fanzam. So when he runs out kind of his energy or whatever, of his own, you could almost say his own willpower, essentially. If he gets too frustrated, or he feels like he can't, deal with something on his own, he sort of uses this other, the substance that's from this. Again, some of you weren't here at the start, so you may not know everything I'm talking about, but there's a substance that comes from a space between dimensions, and it gives people abilities and things. So sometimes he kind of relies on that. So if he loses control, which you see that a lot, he plays with it a lot, where you kind of think, oh gosh, here we go, and he's gonna finally lose it, and this thing is gonna like do whatever it's wanting to do. He does not start destroying everything. It's almost like he's still there. He's still in control, but it's his personality changes, kind of, where he doesn't. He's just if it's even possible, he's more violent, or he's more confident and kind of arrogant, and so it's not so much that he goes and destroys everything, but he just becomes this, he's just not so much himself. And so like his best friend Zeeth, Zeeth hates to see that start to happen. He's like, oh my god, Fanzam, like snap out of it. Like don't, you know, whatever's going on, it can't be good. You know, even though he hasn't fully lost control or whatever, you know, whatever people are wondering is going to happen, Zeeth realizes that, okay, this cannot be a good thing. Like whatever is going on right now, there's no way that there could be like a positive outcome of him losing control to this other thing, for this other thing to take over. That's kind of the what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the right word, but that's just sort of the issue that they're toying with as it plays out in the first book. Are you going to try to have your book published in other languages as well? If so, in which languages would you want it to be published first? Obviously, that would be fantastic, because that would mean that it would appeal to audiences outside of just, you know, English-speaking countries. That would be, in my opinion, that would be spectacular. I would love for other people to be able to enjoy it. As far as other languages, I'm really not picky. It would, I don't know. I would hope that whatever countries had people that were interested in the book, that it would be available for them to read it in whatever language that they needed. That would be kind of the ideal situation. But I don't have a language that I would be like, you know, this one needs to be the first language it's translated into. Yeah, I don't know. It's a very good question, and obviously I don't think I'd ever have a say in it. It would be the publishing houses that would deal with that and figure that out. What about Fanzam's parents? Are they in the book? And if so, what do they think of him and his attitude? And what do they think of his friends? So, here we go with, I don't know if I should talk about that. It leads a little bit into spoilers, not entirely, because you find out pretty quick. But there is so much baggage with that. There's so much that are kind of, there's so much that is unknown about his family and what exactly happened. Because what you hear a lot throughout the first book is that he's the only one left, essentially. That his family, and that he was the one that killed his own family. And you hear that a lot. Trying to think without giving something away. I'm trying to think how to explain it. Because the one family member that for a time you know is alive he has a sister, an older sister, and she was a very, she knew all the stuff that was going on. She used to have a relationship with someone who worked for Jax Finstar. So she knew all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes, and she often, like, she made weapons. Fanzam uses knives. She made his knives. And without giving too much away, the sister, you know, as you're reading the book, that she is dead. But there's so much underlying stuff, like, oh, I can't. I'm going to end up giving things away if I go into it too much. Let's just say that it's far more complicated than who's alive, who's dead, who did the killing, what. There's so much kind of lies going on, and secrets, sort of, I'd say. So, what would his family think of him? His sister was very protective of him, and she cared about him deeply. And she'd be the kind of character that she would not be okay with what he's doing. Obviously, he's just, you know, he loves to kill. He's very bloodthirsty. He is a murderer, essentially. There's no skirting around that. So obviously, his choice of lifestyle, she's not okay with. But she knows that he was infected by this substance. So, you know, part of her is thinking, like, can I really hate him for something that is now becoming part of him that isn't him, but it's influencing his personality. It's changing him into something that was not how he was before. So it's all just, essentially, it's all very complicated. I know you mentioned attributing anime in a character. Are there any specific influences you can think of? I'm curious. Fanzam, from what I've heard, reminds me of the Joker, Amon, or Mikoto. Okay, so... oh my gosh, specific. So Fanzam in particular, I could easily see pieces of him being in all three of those examples. Obviously, the Joker has had the biggest influence on me of any particular character, any villain. He's sort of my inspiration for villains. So without a doubt, the Joker, there's probably a part of him in many of the characters, not just Fanzam. There's one in particular I can't describe, one character that I can't really talk about because he comes in later in the book and he's sort of this blind side, like you sort of see coming but not really. And so I don't really want to give too much detail on him, but he is very much inspired by the Joker. Just sort of his mentality on the world, and then Amon and Mikoto. So Amon, yes, I mean it's not so much that Amon inspired any of the characters because Amon didn't exist when I wrote these books, or the first book, and so it's more like when I saw Amon on Legend of Korra, Amon reminded me of my characters, which is why I glommed onto him. For those of you who knew my love of Amon as I was editing videos and stuff, that he reminds me so much of so many of the characters. Just the way that he went about his rebellion and everything is very much how some of the characters in my own book, like, that would be how they would approach it. That would be their mentality. So, and yes, Mikoto even. Yeah, actually, I could see a lot of Mikoto in Fanzam, actually. And again, Mikoto didn't even exist at the time that I came up with Fanzam, so go figure. These are all just characters that, you know, as the characters came along, that I immediately was so intrigued by because I could see my own characters in them. You know, obviously they're not the same sort of personalities or anything, but there's just little characteristics that are very familiar. How many pages does your book have, and how much time passes from the beginning to the ending of the first book? As in the story, if that makes sense. Yes. So, pages is hard to judge because the pages change with as you're writing the actual books. But I can give you word count and kind of give you an idea. I can compare it to another book. So, word count, the first book is over 85,000 words, which that is, if I remember correctly, it's longer than the first Harry Potter, but it's about the length of the second one. So the first book, you know, it's not some big, long, like, huge book, but it's still long enough that you really, really get a taste of what's going on. And I anticipate that the second book and the third book will be longer. And in fact, here for laughs, this is the entire first book. Yeah, this is the entire first book printed. So pages, yeah, I suppose I could count these pages or look on a Word document, but that really doesn't give you a good idea of what it would look like in a real book. If it was the same print as the Harry Potter books, that if it was, you know, the same print, same page size and all that, it would be the length of the second Harry Potter, because they're about the same word count. And then how much time passes from the beginning to the ending of the first book. So something that I briefly mentioned at the beginning of the live stream was that, okay, I'm trying to think how to explain this really briefly. Is that the way that the book is set up is you're at the start of the book, you are with Fanzam's best friend. You're with Zeeth. And Zeeth, at the start of the series, Fanzam and Jack Spinstar are gone. They have been missing for 2 years. They're completely out of the picture. And Zeeth is one of the few characters that has not given up. He has spent the last 2 years trying to figure out what the hell happened to them and where they are. And so the way that the first book starts is he receives something that lets him see the thoughts and memories of other characters that he interacted with during the months leading up to Fanzam disappearing. And that's how the first book is set up. So you're seeing these memories and these thoughts and finding out what happened, or that's what Zeeth is hoping to find out. And so as far as time passing, I mean, if we're just judging it by the memories themselves, it's only a matter of a couple months. And even more so, realistically, more like 3 days, because some of the months have time skips. Since you're looking at memories, there's these time skips, and then you get like this full brunt of these different characters and what happens within the days leading up to Fanzam and Jack's disappearing. And then, but as far as like the overall time frame, obviously it's not that much because it's Zeeth getting sucked into these memories and coming out of them. So in that respect, it's just kind of complicated with the first book. The second and the third would be far more straightforward because there's not this kind of memory thing going on, basically. Is there, well, this is an interesting question. Is there a character that represents you in the book? If not, then how long do you think you could survive in that world, since it seems there are a lot of characters who like to fight? So, is there a character that represents me? Aside from the violence aspect, because I am not, obviously my go-to answer would be Zeeth. Zeeth is the one that's very, like, he's not violent at all. He's like, okay, you guys just go have your fight over there, you go stab each other over there, I'm gonna go stand over here and not watch. I'm gonna, like, you know, he gets queasy easily when he sees blood. He's just not a fighter at all. He can be brave when he needs to be, but he is only there for Fanzam. He's there to help him and make sure that he gets through the shit that's happening in his life. But he's not at all comfortable with what's happening. So in that respect, I relate to that just because I am not confrontational. I am not fight, no, just no. So yeah, in that respect, Zeeth. But as far as personality, I'd almost say I'm a combination of him, Fanzam, when he's not being temperamental, like his thought process, that's why he's so easy for me to write, is that his thought process is very similar to my own, except that I don't consider myself violent or bad-tempered. But when he's kind of calm and trying to figure things out, how he goes about doing that is how I would, and that's how I wrote him. And then Zia, the female that sort of has a hold over everybody. It's not so much that she's a lot like me, she's almost how I would like to be. just sort of, she's extremely independent. She's very, oh, there's some things that I'm not, it would just be too awkward to talk about. Like this, you just need to read the book to understand some of her dynamics with other characters. She's not feminine really. She is very much kind of a tomboy sort of character in a way. Like she is, most of the guys describe her as being extremely attractive. She is attractive, but she's not. She doesn't dress like, she doesn't care. She runs a bar. She's a hip woman, so it's it's not like she needs to visually impress people. She's just sort of, she doesn't like stereotypes, yet she purposefully fulfills her own stereotypes that people would have of her, like the fact that she smokes and she has tattoos and the kind of clothing that she wears. I don't smoke. Yes, I have a tattoo, but I'm not. I can't think of the right word to describe that type of person. But the point is that she does those things on purpose. She sort of does it it's kind of her own, what would be the right word? It's kind of her own entertainment in a weird way, because then people don't know what to expect from her. Because it's like, okay, she's doing these stereotypes on purpose, but that's not her at all. And so she like psychs people out because she does things that they aren't anticipating. So in a way, no, I'm not really like her, but there are so many qualities about her that I admire. And you said, if not, then how long do you think you could survive in that world? I don't think I would survive very long unless I had a connection to someone who was a force to be reckoned with in that world that cared about me. Just sort of that dynamic that Fanzam and Zeeth have. The fact that Zeeth is not, he would not survive on his own, really, if he didn't have support from other characters. And so that's sort of how I feel I would be. Yeah, I'd be dead pretty quick. Is the story taking place in the future? No, the story is actually present time. So it's think of it this way, because I had mentioned that there's multiple dimensions. So think of it as all of the stuff that's happening in the story is happening now. Like in our world, it would be happening in the present. It's just in a different dimension. So I don't want to go into too many details of things that'll happen later on in the books, but you could kind of play with the idea of, if there's different dimensions, could our dimension, our own world, sort of exist within this story? Because theoretically, if they're going to different dimensions, they could even come to our dimension and they'd end up, wherever in our world. So it's definitely present time. Oh, and what about animals? Animals, okay, so one character, I don't know how much to give away about this character because it would potentially, it could potentially spoil things. So I'm going to be very careful how much I say about this character. But there is, I don't even know how to go about explaining it without giving it away stuff. There is a character that looks basically like a wolf, sort of, but it's very, almost more like a fox, but it's an elongated, like a large, it was an experimental thing. And so it kind of has like the tail of a fox, head of like a wolf fox thing, gaunt, very gaunt, long legs, so it's large. Or, you know, not huge, but it's not like a little tiny fox. And then it has like one blue eye and one green eye. So a lot of times any of the animals that come into it don't tend to be normal animals. There's some sort of creation or some sort of, because Jax, the main antagonist, Jax Finstar, he, and other characters as well that you find out later in the story, he has all kinds of weird stuff that he tries not just on people. Yeah, I'm not going to give away too much. But yes, there are, if you want to call them animals, I don't know if it would be considered an animal, but there are kind of creature sorts of things. As far as other animals in their particular world, they'd be very similar to the ones in our own. Again, being sort of like a parallel dimension, you could expect, even though there may be some different creatures, for the most part, things that we're familiar with would be in their world. So the creature thing I was describing that looks like a fox wolf thing, that would not be normal. So that creature is constantly like avoiding being seen, basically, because it's not. I'm gonna give things away. I'm not just gonna move on, or I'm gonna end up blowing my cover and giving away important information. I didn't quite catch what they're fighting about. Like, there are these two sides, but what do they stand for? What do they want? Sorry, I'm sure you talked about this already, but I just need to know. Okay. Yes, we covered it, but I will briefly recover it because there are people who are here that didn't hear this before. So, oh gosh, where to start? So, trying to make this brief. Trying to make it brief. Basically, the main character, Fanzam, used to work for the main antagonist, Jax Finstar. Their relationship, they had a very good relationship initially. Jax Finstar is like in his early 40s. Fanzam is only like 19. So there was kind of like this brother-mentor sort of relationship. Fanzam was like a hitman, basically, for Jax. He'd take care of a lot of just the dirty work and things that needed to be done. Jax runs this corporation. He's the CEO of this technological company. He does all of his experiments on the side, questionable experiments, even on people. And Fanzam really didn't care. He just worked for him. He loved to fight. He's bloodthirsty. He likes to. It's not just it's not just like fighting that he likes. He is satisfied being able to. He doesn't just want like easy little things that like easy tasks. He likes finding people to fight against that push him. That's I guess a good way to describe it. Is he likes to wow, what is the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the word. Anyway, he likes to be pushed, again, I guess is the only word I can think of. In fights. So he enjoyed his role because he could take on the more difficult tasks and he could feel kind of fulfilled in what he was doing. But then he ends up finding out things that Jax is doing, and he ends up helping. Jax kind of sides with this weird substance that's from this space between dimensions. He ends up helping it, and it involves Fanzam, and Fanzam's like, screw you guys, I don't want any part of this. And so essentially the fighting that is happening in this book is that Fanzam has a debt to repay. And without going into detail on what the debt is, because I want to leave that for the book, but he's just trying to avoid repaying this debt. He's not the kind of character that is okay with being controlled. He's very, very arrogant, and so his his solution, instead of, you know, I don't know what you could do in that situation, like talk it out. You know, he had a good relationship with Jax, and instead of, like, you know, trying to work something out, he's like going cold turkey and he leaves. And so to people on the outside, it just looks like this petty fight that's going on, but look under the surface and you find out all these other things that are going on, and other characters that have their own agendas, and it's very, very complicated. Okay, so that means that the events that happened in the past in real life also happened in the book, right? I'm trying to think trying to comprehend what you're asking. So that means that the events that happened in the past. You may have to reword that one. My brain is not, like, processing what you're. I'm sorry. Trying to process what you're asking. Yeah, I don't quite follow. But just, yeah, reword it, and I can answer it. I cannot believe that it's already been, or we're coming up now on the 2 hours. That is crazy. Wow. I mean, I don't mind going longer if you guys do have other questions, or if you have wrap-up questions, and if you guys are really interested, we can definitely do this again. I don't mind doing more Q&A sorts of videos. Yeah. But if you guys do have more questions, I don't mind hanging around and answering a few more questions. And especially, Des, if you want to reword your question, I feel bad that I cannot answer it at the moment. Okay, so yes. Okay, finally, it took a moment. I'm like, I was still trying to process. Yes. And basically the only difference is that since they're in a different dimension, from that may or may not have happened, if that makes sense. So even though they're parallel, so there's all these different dimensions, and some of them are more like parallel dimensions where there are a lot of similarities, but yet there could be key events that did not happen in their dimension. So you hear a lot about, because you don't hear much about wars in their dimension. There isn't kind of talk. There's this little feud going on, but you really don't see, like, the wider scale what's going on in the rest of their world. You only see the feuding that's happening within Larnus, and so in their world, for reasons that I'm not going to go too much into it, but that particular event, 9/11, like, that would not have happened in their world, because there's something else that, so yeah, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I do get what you're asking. So yes, there are certain things that would happen in their world that would be the same as ours, but not everything, if that makes sense. Like how I mentioned that the fact that they have airships. Like, we do not have airships in our world. So it would almost be, I guess, a good way to explain it. You know how they talk about, like, the butterfly effect? Like, if you went back in history and you squashed some important butterfly that changed the world and the way things developed. It'd be kind of like that in these different dimensions. That you have some that go this one path, but maybe in this other dimension, the important butterfly got squished and other events didn't happen. I think of it that way, if that helps. Does the world in the book look the same as our world? And are there the same countries? Also, do the different dimensions all look the same, or are they all completely different? So, for the first part, does the world in the book look the same as our world? Parts of it, certain aspects, yes. I would say that the dimension, because the very first book you're only in one dimension. The second book you're going to a lot of different dimensions. The dimension that they are from looks like our world, but there's weird things that are different. Again, going back to the airship example. So, you know, you have like these big cities. Larnus is a big city. So you have like these metropolitan areas that would look like our cities. Yet, what's in the sky? You have a freaking airship in the sky. So there's aspects that I would say the landscapes and some aspects of technology would be the same, but yet there's pieces that are totally different. Like they, in this particular dimension, rely a lot more on train transportation than anything else. And there are countries that rely mostly on trains. But this would be like most of their entire world, their dimension relies on train systems, and that certain technologies are a luxury. The airships belong to Jack Sminstar's company. He has this technological monopoly on their world. So, yeah, I hope that kind of answered that part of the question. And then are they the same countries? So with the countries, some countries are the same, some are not. So for example, the one country that you hear about in the first book that is mentioned is Japan. And so I guess for sort of obvious, not obvious, but since Japanese culture in, you know, anime and just being, I went to Japan and just being in the culture and being so intrigued by the culture so much, like that is, again, just the sort of things that has like these little tributes. So Japan is mentioned because there is another character who he's half Japanese. And so he mentions, like, he's talking to Fanzam about something, and he's like, my name's not weird, it's just Japanese. You know, how can you call my name weird when your name is some made-up weirdness? So they have this, you know. So anyway, yeah, so there are some countries that are the same, but some countries we have would not exist, and some countries that they have could just be maybe a different name for the country or different like territorial boundaries, just little things that would be different. Also, do the different dimensions all look the same, or are they all completely different? So, some are the same, some look the same, but like what we've been kind of talking about, that some of them are very similar with little minor differences, and then some are completely different, completely, absolutely different. One that they go to, just the cultures are, I don't know how to describe it without, like, I don't want to give too much detail because part of the fun is, like, you know, being immersed in it and reading it, but some of them would not be reminiscent of our world at all. And, like, some dimensions would be completely undeveloped. Some, you know, maybe don't even have a big human population. It could all just be, you know, wildlife and no buildings, no technology. So there's all sorts of different scenarios going on with the other dimensions. Does the story take place in multiple countries? Since there are airships they can travel by, or are the airships meant for transport? Okay. You are getting onto plot stuff right now. Oh gosh. So, Again, the airships belong to Jax Vinstar. It's his company, his entire corporation that they belong to. What is the purpose of it? I'm trying to think how to do it without giving you actually, that's actually a plot point, because you see this at the beginning of the book, and it's like, okay, Fanzam wants to take, he leads a raid on one of the airships. He wants to take one, and people throughout it are like, okay, are we just okay? He's just, I guess he's doing this because he's pissed and he hates Finstar and he's just gonna go muck up his his technology. But there's like so much, there's so much more behind it that you don't know that's going on. You don't know Fanzam's motives, and you don't know Jax's motives. The airships do have a purpose, and it's not for general transport, though it could be. It sort of would just depend if he was selling them, because part of what he does is he does sell to certain investors. People call him, he has a market, and people call him Dr. Green. Again, green, the color green. If I go into it, I'm going to end up giving things away, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. Theoretically, yes, they could use them to travel, but most people just use train systems to get to places. And then characters that have these abilities, obviously, Fanzam doesn't need to take a train anywhere or a plane anywhere. He just sort of teleports and he's wherever he wants to be. But again, there are limitations on his abilities, what he can do, who he can move, teleport with him, and all these different things that make it a little bit more realistic as a sci-fi fantasy book can be. I always just find it more interesting when there are limits to what people are capable of. I find it much more interesting, and how they cope, how you cope with having like these crazy abilities, yet, oh crap, like if I do this, then I'm screwed, sort of thing. Just having restrictions on their powers and stuff. Any more questions? Just briefly mentioning, I don't know if people have more questions, but for those of you that aren't aware, we will have the trailer, the book trailer should be out fairly soon, and we will see. I think it's going to be pretty epic with the voiceovers and things, and I haven't laid down any images yet, but I've been putting together some of the voiceovers and the music and sound effects and all this stuff, and it's pretty epic. So I will let you guys know when that's out, and it should be pretty cool. I'm looking forward to it. I'm very excited just to see what everybody comes up with. And that'll also kind of give you a good flavor for the book, and the different kind of character dynamics and stuff, even from the quotes, just how people interact with each other. So yeah, I'll take any last minute questions. Do we have any last minute questions? Are we ready to wrap up? And again, just let me know if this is something, if you guys are interested in this sort of thing and you'd like to have one again, but something, I don't know what we'd talk about, but without going into too much detail. Oh, more than culture and stuff. I meant geographically. Oh, wait. I missed. Wait. Ah, there's so many. Hang on. Oh. What about deaths? if someone dies in one dimension, does that mean they're also going to die in the other dimension? Or is that also completely separate? So, okay. So if someone dies in one dimension, does that mean they're also going to die in the other dimension? So I think what you're getting at is so if the worlds, if you have these parallel worlds, are you referring to like if there's people, you know, if it's like a person in another dimension? Is that kind of what you're thinking? Because there is an element of that in the books, but it's not that it's the same person in each dimension, which I can't. I'm gonna give away too much stuff, but there's like no way to explain this without going into a ridiculous amount of detail on how there's these connections into other dimensions with people in another dimension. But no, if somebody dies in one dimension, it doesn't affect any connections they have in other dimensions with another person in another dimension. I think, is that what you were getting at? Maybe. If not, you can ask me again, or if something needs to be clarified if I didn't explain it right. So I'd say they're separate with what you were asking then. Yeah, that the deaths don't affect death in one dimension does not affect death in another dimension, if that's what you were asking. More than culture and stuff, I meant geographically. Like, is there an ocean at the same place of every dimension and the real world? No. So, geographically, it's one of the, I can't say no because there's so many dimensions. Like, it's not something where I could give a number to how many dimensions that there are. Some of them would be so identical that theoretically, yeah, the geography would be exactly the same. Yet there would be something there hadn't. For the way the book is written, for another dimension to exist, there has to be something different about it, even if they're almost identical. So with their dimension, the geography would not be the same. Parts of it could be, like for example, the way I envision Japan existing in their dimension would be very similar to how it is in our dimension. But other aspects, like where they're at in their city in Larnis, and there's more snow and the forest, and as you go out, they have the desert. That setting is not anywhere in particular in our world. It would be something. It would be its own geography and stuff, which I've actually. It's funny you ask. I've actually sketched. I've done sketches of like what their world looks like and stuff. So, no, that answers your question. The lands would be different. The oceans would be different. At least comparing our world to theirs. Talk about the relationship between. Yeah, it's Rin, not Ren. So it's R-I-N, Rin, and her partner, please. So Rin and you mean the one that the guy that he works or she interacts with is Frey. So oh gosh, so Rin. There is this whole, you talk about like triangle, love triangle, square, heptagon relationships. If we go into the relationship bits and stuff, Rin fancies Fanzam. She is very much. She cares about him, and she's very quiet about her feelings toward him. Except, directly to him, but to the other characters, she's pretty vocal about how she feels about him. But then obviously you have this dynamic with Frey, where Frey is always protecting her and is always looking out for her. So there's kind of this question of, How does Frey feel about Rin? And, you know, is it a duty sort of thing because he's in this situation and he feels like it's his role to protect her? Or is there more, you know, he is a very, very quiet and very reserved character, so he wouldn't ever talk, he wouldn't talk about his feelings. You only start hearing that actually in the second book, where he finally sort of, very, very minute, where he just starts to talk about, you know, maybe how he feels, or that sort of stuff. So if that's what you were getting at, if that's what you were wondering, is relationship dynamics like that. Otherwise, as far as personalities, they're just complete opposites in a way. Because Rin is very expressive. She's very she decorates everything. So they're at a hospital. I hear I'm cracking up at my own stuff. Okay, anyway, so they're in this hospital, and Rin decorates this table with flowers and vases, and they're all like colored and something. So the way that Fanzam's abilities work is he can actually use somebody else's vision. He can see the world normally if he borrows somebody else's vision. And so he does that sometimes just to see like what's going on around the room, you know. And so he sees this table with all the vases, and it like pisses him off. He just doesn't. It just, you know, he internally, you hear his internal sort of thoughts and stuff, and he just has this urge to smash the table and the flowers. So Rin is just this very, very bubbly, very happy, sort of protective, also very protective sort of character. That caring, I guess, would be the word. And yet she has her own abilities, and so part of that has to do with speed. She has a lot of speed. She here's the interesting thing, actually, is that one of her kind of ability sorts of things is very reminiscent of an Avatar character that was actually never intentional, because I developed, like I said, most of these characters, you know, I've had in my head since I was little. And so Rin was always this speedy character who would target pressure points, like Ty Lee sort of thing. But there's more to it than that. But that's just sort of like her most basic go-to thing that she likes to do. But mainly, she's kind of the getaway. She can get in and out of something for recon, or her speed is enhanced. And then you have Frey, and Frey is like this, like I said, very quiet, very reserved sort of character, and you don't get to hear a lot of what he's thinking or how he's feeling. And he is much more, you know, Rin is this small, petite little person, and with this long, long hair that goes on for days that she puts up in her messy buns, and you have Frey, who's this, he is much more put together looking, except when he uses his abilities, obviously, because he's the one who has the bone. His bone can act as a shield outside of his skin. But it's extremely dangerous because it heals so slowly, so he tries not to use it very often. Yeah, so their dynamic is that Frey is very supportive of her, even if he doesn't like outwardly, like, so, you know, even if he doesn't say it out loud that he's supporting her, he'll like, there's little gestures that he does that it's just fun to write for. She's like this little firecracker, and she'll go and sit somewhere, and she's described as she kind of bounces a lot, or she'll get agitated, and she's very animated when she uses her hands, and her buns are going and stuff, and Frey's just like, yeah, we can do that if you want. Oh yeah, we can go there if you want. He's just very supportive in a very quiet, under the radar sort of way, which it'll be interesting just to see as people are reading the books that I think as the writer I'll just have fun being able to see how people you know, what they make of the different dynamics, or who somebody mentioned earlier, like couples and relationships, and just seeing, like, you know, who wants who to go and be with another character, or who, it'll just be very, very interesting for me, because I have in my head, you know, what would happen and who's gonna go where, and but it'll just, I think it'll be fun just to see what other people make of it. So yeah. Do we have one final question? I'll do one more. One more question, if anybody has one. And if not, we will end. That's not bad. We only went over, you know, if I get one more question, maybe over half an hour. I think we did very good. So if person A dies in dimension 1, does that mean the version of person A dies in dimension 2 and 3? No. And that's because it's more complicated than that. There are carbon copies of the same person in multiple dimensions. I can't go into it too much. It'll give away a lot of plot stuff, a lot of interesting things that go on that actually has to do with that. But no, if one person dies in one dimension, then nothing else happens to their other, you know, if you want to call them copies, but they're not really copies, they're completely different people. But I get what you're getting at. But no, they're not connected. In fact, they wouldn't even know if something happened to another copy in another dimension. Nobody would even know that it happened. There's no like connection that people are like aware of, if that makes sense. People are like aware of. Yeah, I think that's, hopefully the questions weren't like lagging or something. I think that was the last question, hopefully. Yeah, so I'd say this was a lot of fun. This is very interesting to answer all these questions and stuff. So yeah, if you guys have other questions, then you can either PM me, or we can make another video out of it if you're wanting more information. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope it was informative and gave you a better idea of. Wait. Here's a couple more interesting questions. Any gay characters? Dun dun dun. Okay, so yes, and I'm not going to. There is, without going into detail, because I don't want to like give things away, but there is a character who is he's actually bi, and you find out later, and it's not something like, it's not obvious, and he's just sort of I don't know how to describe it. He's a character that comes in later. He's not, you don't really see much of him initially. And then he comes on, but he's still kind of a core character. You just don't initially see much of him, if that makes sense. So yes, there is. Is there a possibility of people meeting themselves if they jump from dimension to dimension? Is there the possibility of them? Yes. And I'm not going to go into any detail, but yes, there is most definitely a possibility of them running into their other selves, even though, again, as I mentioned before, they're completely different people. So it's very complicated because they wouldn't initially, you'd have no idea that this other character or this other person in this other dimension is like another version of you. You'd have no idea because they won't even look. You know, it could be a male and a female. You could be a guy in one dimension, and then in another one you're connected to a female in another dimension. So it's very complicated. But yes, that possibility exists. If many people wanted something to happen, like a specific relationship, would you change your plans just to satisfy the readers? I don't think so. And here's the reason behind that is I feel like if you let one aspect go, like if you decided, you know, if I told myself, oh, you know, the fans, they want this pairing together, so that's the only pairing, I'll just, you know, I'll give them this one, I'll just do this pairing. But I feel like that opens the door for you to do that with so many other aspects of the story. You know, not just pairings, it could be plot things where, you know, people want something to happen, and then by allowing yourself to change one aspect of what you were doing, I think you kind of mentally allow yourself to make other changes. And I feel like it's kind of weird. I almost feel like it would be a disservice to the readers, because if you set it up in a way, if you set up the books where that was the goal, where you wanted, which I don't even know if that's ever happened. I mean, it might have, where fans or readers were able to influence the path of the story as the author was writing. I mean, that could very well have happened in some series that I don't know about, but you know, I don't know. I'm at this point, I'm guessing I wouldn't do that because I feel like it's more true to the characters and just more interesting not to. Because I feel like in real life, even if we want people to be together in real life, that, you know, it doesn't always happen, but you can still kind of be on the side. I will still, basically the way I think about it is that as the writer, I will be supportive of any pairings that anybody supports. Any pairings that anybody wants to see, I will be thrilled to hear about. You know, and you know, so if that makes sense. So it may not change the course of the book, but for me as a person, I will be very supportive of any pairings that people are interested in seeing, because chances are, me personally, like, I may love the same character with multiple characters in the book. And obviously that doesn't mean that in the book they're going to be with every single character in the book, if that makes sense. But it doesn't mean that I won't support that fan pairing. Hopefully that makes sense. And I can actually see a lot of that going on with kind of just the key main groups of characters where, you know, already just a few people who have already read the first book, like in my own like close group of friends, or my mom's read it, and so like there's these different, you know, I'm getting like different input where some people are saying, like, if we're talking about relationships, where they're like, oh, I want these two together, you better these two together. Someone else is like, you know, with one of those characters but wanting them with another person. So, you know, I'm already anticipating that that is probably going to happen. Hopefully. Oh wait. There's another question. Before it's too late, Tasha. Oh, I want to thank you for answering our questions. Oh, nice. Thank you. Yes, you guys are most welcome. And if anything, as cheesy as this may sound, I should be the one thanking you guys, because if I didn't have people that were interested in the story, and interested even in asking these questions, then what's the point? Like, it's one of those things that on the one hand, yes, I'm writing this. I am, partly writing it for me and just to have it out. And I've felt for so long like this was something that these characters have been with me since I was little. So it's like, oh, I need to write them down. I need them to be just somewhere solid and just have their story written. But it's more complicated than that, because I feel like if I didn't have anybody to enjoy it with, again, it's a little cheesy, but if I didn't have anybody to enjoy it with and share it with, then for me, I don't think I would feel very satisfied. Yeah, so thank you guys for participating. I really do appreciate it. I think we're gonna peace out now, guys. But like I said, if you guys want more of this sort of thing with the books, aside from the trailer, we can definitely do that. I can do more Q&As, as long as I still have more to talk about without giving away key plot points. Anyway, thank you for sitting through this video and participating. And like I said, if there's extra questions, I will answer them either in PMs or in the next. If we do another video like this, I'll answer more in another Q&A. Yeah, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day or night or morning or wherever you're at. And yeah, see you again next time. Bye.